No, no, but you can come over here, sir, once we are there.
I think Priya is going to start.
Yes.
Yes. Days, I'll take it.
Good morning. Good morning and welcome to the first webinar conducted by Pune Health Tech Community and with association with Venture Center Pune. My name is Dr. Viraj Vaidya. I am a part of Pune Health Tech Community where we help entrepreneurs like you connect and collaborate with mentors, peers, clinicians and healthcare institutions for bigger and better impact in healthcare. On behalf of Pune Health Tech Community, I welcome Dr. Premnath, Director, Venture Center Pune, and Dr. Priya, Bio-Incubation Manager, Venture Center Pune, for today's webinar. The topic for today's webinar is raising early stage grants and seed funding for healthcare startups in Pune. With that, I'll let Dr. Priya give a brief about Venture Center, and then we can start with the actual webinar. There is a chat window given, so you can actually post your questions, which we are going to take it at the end of the webinar. Okay, sure, we'll start now. Thank you, Dr. Priya. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Viraj.
Good morning to all of you. I'm Dr. Priya Nagraj. I take care of bio-incubation activities in Venture Center. I also mentor early-stage biotech startups. A virtual welcome to Venture Center. I'll be just moving the camera to the screen where you will be able to see the slides that we will be projecting today. The slides will also be shared with you at the end of this presentation. So as part of today's webinar, we will be just doing a brief overview of Venture Center with a focus on bioincubation and the offerings we provide for medtech startups. Dr. Premnath will talk about pitching scientific enterprises, a few key perspectives, and also funding landscape for scientific enterprises. I will talk about grant writing with an emphasis on the biotechnology ignition grant. We will also highlight other funding opportunities provided by the various funding agencies in India, particularly BIRAC. And we will also talk about certain highlights of current calls that are open and then take questions from you. So Venture Center is a 12-year-old science and technology business incubator. We have been supported by various government bodies over a period of time, whom we are thankful to. Our mission is to nucleate and nurture technology and knowledge-based enterprises for India by leveraging scientific and engineering competencies of institutions in the region. We focus on inventive enterprises, spin-offs from R&D organizations, biotech, biomed, healthcare startups, social innovation enterprises, energy and environment ventures, and material science-centric products. We are India's largest inventive enterprise incubator. We are open to all, sector agnostic, but our ecosystem is aimed at supporting startups with a science and technology strength. We also hosted by CSIR NCL, approved by NSTDB and BIRAC, which are government bodies, and recognized by DSIR and DIPP. We are the first incubator in the CSIR system and home to a BIRAC BioNest and a Nidhi Center for Excellence. So our offerings include advice and mentoring for early stage as well as late stage startups. We also provide fundings in the form of fellowships, grant, and seed investments. We are also implementation partners for several funding opportunities that the government bodies provide. We provide infrastructure in the form of labs, offices, and high-end scientific facilities. We have prototyping facilities like the Tinkering Lab, Prayashala, POC labs, clean room, etc., which are more medtech focused. And we also provide tech commercialization support in the form of facilitating intellectual property filing and offering advice on regulations for your biotech products. Also, we have a library and we host several events over the year, about more than 150 events, which is collectively attended by over 5,000 people. We also have a lot of extended mentor networks who mentor our startups and in-house ecosystem partners and service providers who aid in our startups in several ways. We've been recognized by both national as well as international bodies. More recently, we won the National Entrepreneurship Award from the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship. This is just a snapshot of some of the resources we offer. You're welcome to come and visit us. We are located in Pashan in Pune. This is a glimpse of some of the events that we have done over the past years. Our incubating statistics include about 76 resident companies, and we've supported about 125 companies till date. The total companies we've supported in the form of mentorship as well as physical incubation includes totals to about 450. Our largest incubatee has raised over 100 crores in investments, and collectively, our incubatees have filed about 55 plus patent families. Most founders come with work experience in the industry and tech development sectors. Our founders come from reputed organizations. 30% of startups have women founders, and 90% of beneficiary companies are still active, even if they've graduated from Venture Center. The domains that we support include healthcare. About 61% of our companies work in that space. Clean energy, environment, agro and industrial biotech, ICT, electronics, and others. This is a snapshot of the kind of companies that we support and the domains that they're in. Under healthcare, we have biomedical devices, implants, diagnostics and detection, as well as biopharma. We have energy and environment, bio-IT, agriculture and secondary agriculture, bioprocess engineering, engineering and electronics, as well as our ecosystem partners. So more specifically, what might interest you is the kind of offerings we have for medtech startups. We at the need identification stage, we have access to hospitals, NGOs, etc., as well as hot lab facilities where you can come and test out some of the hypotheses that you are making at that stage, and also connect with key stakeholders in the ecosystem to really identify an unmet clinical need. At the proof of concept stage, we offer incubation space, high-end equipment, scientific services for you to test out your ideas. We also have a prototyping facility called Prayashala for design, fabrication, and testing of your prototype. And we also offer mentorship going at a little later stage on how your products are regulated, who is the agency you need to approach, what kind of pathway you will need for you to complete your regulations, etc. And at the trial stage, we have a Class 7 and Class 8 clean room and packaging facility where you can package your products and send it out for testing. And at the market entry stage, we have access to mentors who have in-depth market understanding, who will be able to mentor you in terms of how to take your product into the market. From the funding perspective, we have generally seen that from the need identification to the prototyping stage, it's about 5 to 50 lakhs worth of funding that entrepreneurs typically need. This comes to them in the form of fellowships, which is provided by various government bodies, and in the form of grants, again provided by various government bodies. Going little ahead, these companies become eligible to raise seed funds. This is in inclusion with other grants that they can, late stage grants, they can also raise from the government to the amount of anywhere between 30 lakhs and 1 crore. And we are either implementation partners for some of these funding opportunities, or we ourselves provide seed funding to such companies. As an impact, just a summary, cumulatively, our companies have raised about 64 crores as risk capital in the form of equity and competitive grants. The revenues of current incubatees is around 20 crores, and they've provided over 500 jobs. About 45% of our founders have PhD degrees, and 33% have MTech or MBA degrees. About 40% have science degrees, and 46% have about engineering degrees. And about 15% of our startups have a connection to NCL in that they've been created as spin-off companies from NCL. You can connect with us on social media through Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn to stay updated with the events and the various offerings that we have. And this is our contact information. Please feel free to get in touch with us for any queries. So we'll move on to the next section, which is pitching scientific enterprises. Dr. Premnath will be sharing his perspectives on this.
Good morning, everybody.
I think you must be having the slides available to you, right? Separately. So
Yes.
we'll try and just discuss a few key aspects of pitching a scientific enterprise first, and then we'll talk about a few things you must keep in mind when you're pitching it, even for funding agencies and so on. So every business idea that all of you might be thinking about invariably will have some kind of a problem to solve or an unmet need that you're addressing, and you will want to put together a revenue model around it, and that there has to be some story of eventual sustainability for the company. Now, that is there in every business, and that's something which may not be new for many of you. And in any given pitch, be it to a funding agency or to an investor, invariably what you're trying to do is tell people that here is the investment that I'm going to put in uh, or I'm seeking. And eventually, at the end of the road, there's a potential reward which is much larger than the investment that one is putting in. And that storyline, that the progression towards the reward is what needs to be convincing to the potential investor or funder. So the key questions that anybody would ask is, how much is the investment that you need? Uh, how much is the potential reward? And in the case of funders, which includes government and other impact investors, you will invariably find that the questions around rewards is not just about money; it's also about impact, about what you can deliver at the end of the day, and also about how reliable your story is and how convincing it might be, right? Should I?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, okay. So I think let's focus on that a little bit and try and understand, how this story might be a little more nuanced in the case of scientific enterprises, or a little more slightly different in the case of scientific enterprises. Okay. So if when you're talking about reliability of the story, there is of course there are many aspects to it, including the team that's going to execute, the market conditions, the market opportunity itself, the uncertainties around it, and many other things. But one important thing that comes right up front is, will your technology work? And so in scientific enterprises, the first level of risk is very often the science itself, and then whether the technology will work, whether it will work at scale, whether it works for a large enough population, and so on and so forth. Okay, so a lot of those questions do come into pitches which relate to grant funding as well. Okay, and it will invariably happen that you will need to talk about some of these things when you are pitching it to even a government funder, of how likely or reliable your storyline is. So let's move on. There are different types of businesses, of course. Many of the scientific businesses that we talk about are primarily what are foresight businesses. That means they are looking at a future where there's a fast changing world. You need to grow there, get there fast. And these are the kinds which, the venture capital guys are quite fond of. And then there might be others which are more lifestyle businesses, self-finance kind of ones. There are some others which are, with very predictable revenue models, where banks might be more interested, and multiple bottom line companies which are interesting to impact investors, even government funders, and so on and so forth. So when very often what excites people are the first and the last in this list of four out here, especially in the early stage funding world. And the story you are really presenting is one of foresight and one of impact. Okay, so that is what is very often a key aspect of the presentations that people make pitching their ideas to different funding agencies. Now, entrepreneurial businesses are a type of business, okay, and in these kind of businesses, one of the key things that we uh, tend to see is that the opportunities usually are much larger than the resources that are in the hand of the entrepreneur. So gathering resources is a key aspect of these businesses. These are not the kind where you are saying that you'll grow uh, purely on your revenues, or even another corollary to this is they are not valued on purely revenue streams. Unlike other businesses, they are valued for the technology. And usually the opportunity looks small and then it grows up to be much larger, which also means that the business is scalable, has to be scalable to realize that vision of scale over time. And usually built around some kind of an innovation, either a business process innovation or a technology innovation, or both. In all cases, foresight is key. Now, in scientific enterprises, the innovation often is anchored around technology innovation, and the technical novelty that one sees there is primarily I mean, it's basically an invention that is at the heart of many of these activities. You can look at businesses which are deploying technology for business process innovation, but invariably it is a case of an invention driving many of these businesses. And I think let's talk a little bit more about those kind of businesses. So if you think about scientific inventions per se, or any kind of new idea that you come up with, again, you're invariably looking at a problem definition that you're trying to solve with a new solution that you have put together. The science behind these might have already been figured out in the past. The problem, and in a lot of innovation funding, you will find that they are not necessarily funding the basic research that goes behind establishing science. What they are funding is your translation to a product or a service. And so invariably you have to ensure that the science behind the problem definition, for example, if it's a disease, the cause of the disease or the pathway responsible for the disease is something that you know are very aware of, and the science is very well established. And on the other side, the solution space, a lot of the components that you're bringing to the table, also the science is established. Its application, its direction, its directing it to a particular use may or may not have been put in place. So when in most inventions, what happens typically is that the problem itself, the novelty in the problem um, is 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 in the problem or in the solution, and where you could be getting to the problem first or the solution first. It could be either way, and you might be picking upon things which might have happened in another domain, another time, and putting it together to really bring everything together. Now, in scientific inventions, the insights are coming from science. In other inventions, you may not be drawing upon science. So, for example, a simple zipper, you may not be drawing upon science as a source of the insight, key insight that led to the invention per se. I have a reason for bringing this up because I'll talk to you about a few things that distinguish some of your pitches for scientific enterprises from other other kind of pitches that you might be used to. Innovation, on the other hand, is taking this whole idea, a whole invention or an organizational novelty to the market. Okay, and it's not just its invention, and that requires a lot of different steps. So in many of our cases, you will find that you demonstrate a few key proof of concepts, and then you would have prototypes at different levels illustrating different claims that you're making, and then you would go about looking at rights and trials and approvals that you need to take the thing to market, and finally, think about commercial production and putting the product in use, either yourself or through partners. This journey of converting it to a product in use is something which you have to talk about when you're pitching, and it's important to understand that there are many stages involved in scientific enterprises where you're demonstrating claims that you're making as sound based on sound data, not merely business claims but also technology related claims. So entrepreneurship is clearly the vehicle or the most promising vehicle for delivering innovations in a sustainable and scalable manner. And that, I think, is something which is what we are all looking at. So now let's talk a little bit about what differentiates, say, a typical scientific pitching a typical scientific enterprise from the kind of other businesses that you might be used to pitching. Say, for example, a typical services business or an IT products business, and how would this differ? First thing to remember is in scientific businesses, including biotech and biomed kind of businesses, uh, a key aspect is knowledge intensity. That means that many of the things that you are going to talk about are based on some scientific insights or tools and will rely on past work which other people have done, and one will need to draw upon that to prove that you are distinct, that you stand out, and that there is a source of edge out there because of the knowledge intensity involved in the topic. One other key aspect you will find being asked of you when you're looking at raising money from grant funding sources from both the government and multilateral funding agencies and charitable organizations is the novelty of the idea. In terms of what is novel, and when you're talking about novelty, one is talking about this in a global sense, not necessarily in a local sense. Occasionally, one is looking at first in India solutions with, say, significant social impact. Uh, but very often, people are asking you for novelty in the idea in a global sense. Yet another important aspect of scientific businesses is intellectual property strategy. The first and most important thing is the question of whether you have freedom to operate. Okay, that means, has somebody else filed patents which prevent you from taking your idea ahead? And that is something which you have to have clarity on. You don't want to come to know of it 4 years down the road after you've done all the hard work, that it's protected by patents by somebody else, and therefore that is something which comes first. The next aspect of intellectual property strategy is about whether you have something which can be patented or protected in some form or the other, and will give you a competitive edge over a period of time. Now, this is a different aspect than the freedom to operate aspect, and both are equally important. The next point, which I just wanted to bring up, is just value proposition and quantitative comparison of benefits. So very often you have to look at being able to quantify what value you are going to deliver progressively for the customers, and this is best done with quantification, and that takes considerable time, and align as you do this, you might find that you don't have the right product to market fit, and therefore you might have to go back and forth, iterate, and come back with the right value proposition charts. uh, in every scientific enterprise, you're making certain claims about the science and technology involved, right? So there is some claims that we are going to make on how the science actually will deliver the goods that you're claiming, whether it is scalable, whether it will work in scale, all of those things, and that has to be. You have to you have to systematically establish the claims over a period of time, and that requires a systematic scientific study. So in many grant writing programs or grant funding programs, you might actually need to put down a scientific study that you're going to do which establishes your claim. Very often we find that entrepreneurs miss this entirely and treat it as just, so they're happy saying that we have a prototype that works, but they forget that there might be a need for a scientific study which actually establishes the claims to the satisfaction of the experts. Yet another aspect which is important is technology de-risking and what is called technology readiness levels or validation of your own technology. You must have noticed that some of the funding calls ask you about the technology readiness level, and they say that they would fund, say, an idea from either technology readiness level 0 to 3, or maybe technology readiness level 4 and higher. So it's important that we are aware of these things as well. Yet another difference between different the kind of businesses that you might be engaging with, and especially scientific enterprises bring to the table a need. I mean, usually scientific enterprises need complex and diverse ecosystem needs. You might need a specific facility that is needed, a certain expertise that is needed. You might need to put in a team of experts together who bring in different types of complementing skills, which will be very different than what you might experience in, say, a traditional IT kind of a setup, or a company which is dealing without any science. So when you're pitching for a scientific enterprise, you might need to think through this and identify where you're going to bring in, how you're going to arrange those facilities, or how you're going to put that expertise together, and not underestimate the value of the diverse skill sets that are needed in realizing that particular product. Of course, yet another aspect is timelines. The timelines can be much longer for scientific enterprises, so it's good to have a good estimate of timelines. If these are regulated products, you need to worry about the timelines for regulations. And costs and resourcing is yet another serious challenge. The costs for prototyping may or may not be as high. It could be high if you're using a lot of high-end chemicals and supplies and capex items which you need for realizing your prototype. But one should remember that there will be many other costs. For example, if it's a regulated product, that you cannot, you should not forget to factor in costs related to clinical studies and what you need to do to get the right population tested in order to prove that your system works adequately. Okay, so these are some things which you have to keep in mind. Let me just reiterate: knowledge intensity, novelty, first in India with significant social impact might work sometimes, intellectual property strategy, value propositions, and quantitative comparison of benefits, your systematic studies that you plan, what will be the design of experiments, the technology de-risking strategy and the TRLs, the diverse ecosystem needs and what facilities, experts you need to make it happen, the timelines and the costs. Okay, these are a few things which you might need to think slightly differently than what you might be doing while pitching other businesses. Let me go into a few of these a little more, and then we will go into funding. For most funding programs, even something which you might be pitching to, say, BIRAC, you still need to have some kind of your business sketch in front of you. So this is what minimally we recommend that you should be very clear about at the time when you're pitching a particular proposal. You should be clear what your customer offerings are, what your product or service will be, who is it meant for, and who will pay. You may not have all the details ironed out, but at least there should be clarity on where you're headed and what is likely to be the a target customer for whom you're going to describe some value propositions. Following this, you need to know also the value propositions. Okay, so value for whom, what value, and compared to what. Very often we find that entrepreneurs forget to compare it with the alternatives available to their target customer. And this comparison is best done with numbers. And it's good to have clarity on that. So for example, if you're talking about a screening or a diagnostic tool, you need to know what is the level of, say, sensitivity or specificity that's acceptable to a given customer. Okay, if you don't know that, it's difficult to say whether it will be acceptable to the customer and whether it is value for that customer compared to what is already available as options to the given customer. The third aspect which we also needs to be clear is a revenue model. While you don't need to detail out every aspect of it, you can imagine that the revenue model of how the business will make money is also something which funders, grant funders in the innovation space will want to know. Please note that this is different from grant funders who are funding basic research. Okay, the innovation funders like BIRAC or DST, NST, DB, and so on would want to know how the business would survive, how it will thrive, what will be the way of making money, what will be a price or a cost structure. And you can also imagine that if it's a public health product, they would want to know whether the price looks reasonable to be a public health product. Okay, and what are the key risks and uncertainties to take it to the market, or even with respect to the revenue model? For example, if you have not anticipated the kind of distribution challenges or market access challenges, it really raises a red flag about your ability to take this thing to market. And this is something which many innovation funders would want to know. Please note that even in grant funding right now, say for example what BIRAC does, the committees, especially at the last stage, have business reviewers, in the sense that they look at it from a business viewpoint and not necessarily only from a technical viewpoint. So the review is not merely a technical review. I mean, that has already happened, and the last stage is whether it will deliver on the goals that you're claiming that it will deliver. Okay. Many of you might be familiar with the value proposition canvas, and we think it's a good way to think through carefully what exactly is the value for which customer segment. And we often recommend at Venture Center that you focus on one target niche customer segment and look at what are the specific jobs the customer wants to get done, and what are the gains he might want to have, what are the pains that he's facing right now, and how your product or service is going to deliver those gains or relieve those pains. And there are many ways to think about this very carefully, and one can sharpen this, and one has to sharpen this adequately to really get it to a point where it is crisp and clear. So when we are doing mentoring for some of the grant funding schemes in the innovation space, we do spend considerable time to get this as as strong as possible, and also to convey this in the context of the knowledge and the technology that is going to make all this possible. For example, if you're claiming that there's a particular gain that a customer is going to have, and that is due to the science or the technology that is behind your idea, then that should come out clearly in terms of why is it that your idea is delivering those gains or relieving those pains. Okay, and that is something which we feel many people fail to demonstrate very clearly. They make one other common mistake which many people make is that they tend to focus on features of their product rather than the benefits to the customer. Okay, and there's a difference between that. It's important to focus on the benefits and how the technology that you're developing is going to deliver those benefits, and that I think is a very key aspect of the pitch. And if it comes out well, chances are very high that the rest of your story will fall into place and you will not have trouble conveying your value proposition. Product comparisons are also very important. Value proposition has to be spoken in the context of alternatives. It is not to be spoken in isolation. Every customer has alternative ways to achieve their goals, and it is very rare, or it's very, very unlikely that there is no alternative. Okay, and those benefits will be delivered by somebody in some other way. So the question is, what are those key benefits that you are going to deliver? And if you think that some are not being delivered well enough by the alternatives, or there are certain benefits which you have identified which are not even being addressed by the alternatives, it's for you to bring that out very clearly. In many medical, in many pitches relating to healthcare, you often need to talk about what are the gold standards in the field. That means what is the reference method that will be used, and how you would stack up compared to a reference method in terms of the benefits that you're going to deliver to the customer, okay, and the end user, and what exactly are the key differences in the most important benefits that distinguish you, right? And you could of course do relative semi-qualitative, quantitative or semi-quantitative parameters to demonstrate the value. Ideally, it's good if you have quantitative numbers, at least in terms of the target numbers you're trying to achieve, or what you think you can achieve, because that gives a better sense to the reviewers that you've really studied the field and you understand where other alternatives stand and where you would stand with respect to them. So in the slides which will accompany this video, you will see that there will be a product comparison chart, and that product comparison chart will try to compare different solutions along different engineering parameters, which are then linked to what impact that engineering parameter might have. So suppose there's a product where you're comparing a mechanical property like tensile strength. That is an engineering property or a material property that you're measuring, and then it relates to certain performance issues, and it might be, for example, what it means for the capacity to hold together, avoid breaking, right? And then there would be numbers for the alternatives versus what your target numbers or what you can demonstrate. One, it's clear that there will be situations where you're pitching at an idea stage, and you're not yet ready with the data, and that's the data that you want to generate. It might be a good idea to say what are the numbers you want to achieve or you think you can achieve, at least, and speculate on that, indicating that it is speculative, right? But these are the targets that you're trying to reach. Now, you will clearly realize immediately that those numbers will be viewed by your reviewers and committee members in the context of the technology you're presenting and their expectation of whether those numbers are reasonable and whether you have made an any new advancement in the field in such a way that you can achieve this while others cannot. So for example, it could be a particular technical parameter where you think that you can do it with much greater accuracy, or if you think that you can bring down the cost say tenfolds, and through the innovation that you have, the new idea that you have come up with. Now the soundness of that, how likely that idea is going to result in that benefit is something that is easy to discover for any expert by just studying, the understanding what that idea is. And there will be a sense, everybody will have a sense of whether it is reasonable, whether it is sound or not. It's for you to convey that it is very sound. And how could you do that? You could do that by collecting prior art data from the literature, which seems to head in that direction, or by even sometimes showing some preliminary results that you might have, indicating that it is doable. Okay. Yet another important aspect is what are called positioning charts, and these positioning charts are very critical. In the slides which you will have with the video that you will be watching, there are different positioning charts that you can make, illustrating how your product stands out. You might want to pick, say, a couple of good, very important benefits that you are delivering, which is different than others, and something which your customers understand as important, and then use that to illustrate how you stand in comparison to the alternatives. So let's take a diagnostic, for example. Very often, diagnostics, the parameters that you might be talking about might have to do with sensitivity or specificity or cost or speed, right, of doing the diagnostics. And you might want to pick the top two and then plot out how exactly all the alternatives stand in comparison to what you do. So, very often we'll find charts of sensitivity and specificity, and in the context of cost and speed, and where, say, a rapid diagnostic stands in comparison to a gold standard. Clearly, in this, you have to show where the gold standard stands. That means what is used today as a benchmark, and people will measure it against that, is something which you'll have to compare it with if you're talking about any kind of diagnostic in this field. Let me move on to technology de-risking. Technology de-risking is all about continuously working on reducing your risk in your technology. When you start off with an idea, there will be many uncertainties. You wouldn't know whether the leaps, I mean, the jumps you're making in the thought process are verified, are they tested, are they well known. There might also be uncertainties relating to many other aspects. For example, when you transit from one material to another, which say is more commercially easily available, does it still work? Okay, or when you scale up a particular idea from say 10 liters to 20 liters, 100 liters, does it still work? Okay, if you change certain conditions, does it still work? So there'll be many items that you need to de-risk, and the most important of these are those which are related to your claims. Suppose you're making a claim for a given product that this, say for example, detects with a certain sensitivity. I mean, that means a certain level of that you can detect accurately every time, to certain, for certain concentrations. um, you might, in the next claim you might want to make, might relate to specificity. So first you would say cross one bridge and then go focus on the next item which might relate to specificity. Then there might be another aspect of, your claim of whether it can do it in 20 minutes or not, right, or do it in 3 seconds or not, and that might be something which you might want to prove. So as you prove each of these claims, the value of your technology, and of course over a period of time, including other factors, the value of your business keeps increasing, right? So this is something which is very key. In medical device development, there will be many different stages. The first stage might be, say working at the lab, where you've developed your concept, you understand clearly how things are going to work, you have anticipated as many things as you can from theory, right? And then you go ahead and build a early stage prototype to illustrate the most important aspect of your idea, that indeed something, I mean, one particular property which you thought would be significantly enhanced is really happening, right? But then you might want to create the next prototype which takes care of many more performance needs of the product, and demonstrate that those are also achievable. Then you might need to do the product or the prototype, I mean a prototype version, which makes sure that all the things which are working before for the customer have not stopped working, right? So there'll be a whole array of things which you'll prove one by one, and there'll be a sequence of stages. At some point you might need to do animal studies. At some point you might have to do studies in vitro, and then phantom studies and animal studies, and then maybe look at even clinical studies. So that sequence should be clear to you, and the fact that you have to de-risk it progressively is something which you might have to think through carefully. Okay, so the slide that I'm looking at right now talks about technology readiness levels. Technology readiness levels was a scale which was developed originally by NASA and the US government for their own projects, where they were working on very complicated systems. That may or may not work for every kind of technology, but there are others which are available. BIRAC has also put up a TRL level scale, which is available on its website, and you can use that to see where you stand. Broadly speaking, proof of concept comes roughly around technology readiness level 3. So if you have demonstrated proof of concept experimentally, that's what is TRL 3. So TRL 4 onwards is beyond the prototypes, okay, your early prototypes. So you might need to, if you're talking about advanced prototypes, you're talking about validating it further in different environments at different levels of complexity, and doing it with trials, and doing field trials and so on. Then that becomes that eventually hitting the market, and being proven in the market at TRL 9. So please keep that in mind, because different funding programs will address will be focused on different TRL levels. So even amongst the older schemes of BIRAC, you will find that the ones which go from concept to TRL 3 is primarily, say, BIG, Biotech Ignition Grant, and for academic institutions it's AIR. Okay, Sparsh phase 1 is something which also comes in that domain, and these come at the early stages. And if you're looking at TRL 3 and later, TRL 4 and later, especially if you're talking about clinical trials and so on, that will fit into something like BIPP, which is one of the other programs of BIRAC. Okay, SBRI might also agree to fund something at the pre-proof of concept level, which is yet another program of BIRAC. There are other funding programs of the government which might fit at different levels. For example, Nidhi Prayas from DST will fit somewhere around the prototyping stage. It will be somewhere close to between 3 and 4, and that's where that they might fund you to just make a prototype and demonstrate that things work. Okay, you'll also notice that at the early stages you'll find that most of the funding programs will be grants. Okay, as you progress along this TRL scale, it'll convert into matching grants, or into, in some cases, even loans, and some cases even seed funding, right? And it's as you hit the market, that's many commercial investors will probably want to see you only after you've hit TRL 4, 5, 6, somewhere there. Early stage investors, and the guys who are looking at late stage investment are looking at you after you're in sales and you're demonstrating revenue as well, right? Okay, I want to focus on a few risks right now, and then we can move ahead. There are many risks associated with technology development, and one of the tasks of some of these funded projects is to actually show that you have mitigated many of these risks, or you have made sure that that you can overcome those. Some of them you can do even before, as you're writing your proposal. Okay, by making sure that you're picking the right problem, the right methods. For example, you can think through safety and EHS risks, environment, health, and safety risks upfront. You may be able to anticipate the regulatory processes upfront. Okay, you might be able to anticipate IP risk for an idea, for example, like a freedom to operate risk upfront. So these things they might ask you even when you're presenting your proposal. But